Dr. Jeff Meldrum, and I'm a professor of anatomy and anthropology at Idaho State University in Pocatello, Idaho.
What brings you all the way out to little Merritt, British Columbia?
Well, Sheldon invited me to come up. This is the second year that he's organized a conference of this sort. These have become quite popular and widespread throughout the States and growing here in Canada, it would seem, too. And it's, it's always just a great opportunity to network with people, to share stories and experiences. As an educator, for me, it's an opportunity for academic outreach. One of my goals, is to make sure, not make sure, but one of my goals is to encourage objectivity in the investigation of this mystery, that it be taken seriously, that the evidence be analyzed critically, but scientifically, and it's one of the most fascinating mysteries, questions of natural history that we have today.
And before we get into the meats and bones of things, just for a bit of context, what's your bread and butter on your day-to-day job at Idaho State?
Sure. Well, at Idaho State University, I teach human gross anatomy in the allied health professions that we have, and I do research into the evolution of human bipedalism, which is simply trying to understand the adaptations, the emergence, the timing and pattern of the emergence of the adaptations that we have for walking on 2 feet, and therefore the correlation with the question of another bipedal primate, potentially Sasquatch. What an interesting natural experiment, comparison and contrast to consider these two upright walking primates.
How did you get into Sasquatch research?
Well, it began long ago when I was a lad of about 10 years of age. Roger Patterson, who captured this famous and notorious piece of film footage in Northern California in 1967, had begun showing it to the public, and one of the first public venues in the States was Spokane, Washington, where I happened to live. So I saw that film when I was about 10 years old, 6th grade, fascinated by it, and was very intrigued by the whole phenomenon. One thing led to another. That interest eventually became rather latent, but certainly, if not influenced, it certainly was there in my interests in evolution, in zoology, in biomechanics eventually, and so forth. So I ended up here as a professor, and then the opportunity just simply came across my path to evaluate some photographic evidence, and then to actually see some fresh footprints in the ground in southeastern Washington, outside of Walla Walla.
Mm-hmm.
It was an exceptional case of these inexplicable, otherwise 15-inch footprints, and clear in the mud, very fresh. And being an expert in the anatomy associated with bipedalism, especially the feet, and knowing tracks of humans, modern humans, as well as fossil examples of hominid footprints and non-human primates, I was in a really good position, I think, to evaluate these, and the hook was set. And so now, some 28 years later, I have well over 300 footprint casts in my laboratory that are attributed not only to Sasquatch, but to other potential relic hominoids, branches of this very bushy family tree that we are a part of, that we're becoming more aware of the diversity. So, I'm often asked, what about the abominable snowman, the Yeti? Is that the same as Sasquatch? No, it's not. They have distinctive footprints that appear to be much more ape-like with a divergent big toe. There's a Russian almas, which may be a relic Neanderthal population. In Southeast Asia, there are these little people, the diminutive hobbits, that go by various names in various countries, but they may be relic Australopithecines. These are persistent branches on this bushy tree that have survived into the present alongside of us. So Science is actually, it's quite fascinating. I mean, it's with the advantage of a gray beard, meaning lots of years of experience, I can see how science is finally kind of catching up to this mystery, where we have a context from which to consider the possible existence not only of Sasquatch, but of other relic species around the world, which, in my mind, makes the whole proposition of Sasquatch less enigmatic, less inexplicable. It's one of several branches that have just avoided recognition by the scientific community.
And on that note, where would you say academia is with these offshoot humanoid branches?
It's the notion that there could be such relic hominoids is gaining some traction amongst the scientific community. There's a long shadow that's cast by the prevailing paradigm of the 50s and 60s that there could be only one bipedal hominin in that niche. This kind of ecology concept of one niche, one species. Well, now we know that there are different ways to be a bipedal hominin, and that there were multiple species. And so it wasn't too long ago that the most popular science magazine in Great Britain had a feature article on what were the top 10 questions facing researchers of human evolution today. And I was quite gratified to see number 9 read, "Are other hominins alive today?" Acknowledging that this is a real possibility and that we should be looking at it. The science is coming around, but as Thomas Kuhn, who wrote Scientific Revolutions, who coined the notion of a paradigm shift, noted, it sometimes takes a whole generation to pass away in order for a novel concept to take root. And I think we're witnessing that. The old idea, what was called the single species hypothesis, that we were the only ones, has passed away, but the influence of that generation persists, and the upcoming generation that may have more interest, more curiosity about this question, have to kind of bide their time until the gatekeepers have literally passed away and cleared the field for a more objective consideration of a fascinating scientific question.
So, to my understanding of what you've just said and a lot of what I've heard leading up to covering this, a lot of people are saying that these are offshoot branches that just survived. How do you think these, first of all, how many do you think there are?
Sure. Well, I think that given the scarcity of evidence, the infrequency with which people have encounters, these are very rare animals, and that fits with sort of the concept of a large-bodied primate. The typical natural history of such a species, if we were to draw analogy to gorillas or chimps or orangs, these are long-lived, infrequently reproducing, slowly developing animals, the populations of which have very low numbers compared to things like ungulates, hoofed animals, or rodents, And so just kind of a rule of thumb, just for the sake of conversation, it's been suggested for every 200 black bear, there may be one Sasquatch. So here in BC, there's about 110,000 black bear. So, do the math. It would be, 1,100 to 550, thereabouts, if you span 100 to 200 black bear. So, not that many. I mean, BC offers if the population of black bear is any indication of the potential habitat for another large omnivore, then it has lots and lots of potential across the entire United States. Again, if you look at United States and Canada, across North America, if you look at the population numbers of bear, there's probably a couple of thousand Sasquatch distributed across the entire continent. So, most encounters with Sasquatch happen purely by chance. which makes it very challenging. And for someone like me who intentionally hopes to go out in the field and collect information, collect data, the chances are really low. And I have to rely on, and that's another reason for coming to these type of events, I rely on the citizen science, the citizen scientists, the amateurs, the avocational Bigfoot enthusiasts who go out and may collect data, may find, or even indirectly bump into people, interview witnesses, and collect that information and make it available.
And how do you think these offshoots, how do you think they survived for so long?
Yeah. Well, all species are adapted to their particular niche. So when we look at a bushy tree, yes, there is extinction along the way, but there are branches that persist because they are adapted to the habitat in which they live in. When I look, one of the things I'll talk about in some of my presentations is, what is the evidence that we have that the creature described as Sasquatch is well adapted to its habitat. And when we go through things like, social structure, diet, locomotion, etc., we find that there's a creature that is absolutely reasonable and logical and coherent in its expressed adaptations, both anatomy and described behavior, for a large-bodied primate adapted to life in a temperate forest. And so given their rarity, given their solitarity, given their reclusiveness, the avoiding human contact, for the most part. I mean, obviously there's some contact, but as I said, it's usually serendipitous. But an intelligent animal may also be rather curious, and so a campsite, a cabin, human activities may draw it in, whether it's the sights or the sounds or the smells of cooking food, and that may lead to encounters and contacts. But otherwise, the encounters are very, very rare and infrequent.
Have you had any yourself?
I caught a glimpse of something. It was actually here in Canada. I was in Alberta at the invitation of an investigator in that province, and we were up on the Rockies to the west of Calgary, and something we had been finding sign in the form of footprints. We heard some vocalizations. Something approached camp one night. We would usually routinely stay up very late in hopes of attracting something to our campfire. Something making audible vocalizations that were kind of whistling, kind of bird-like, but then accompanied by the sound of crashing brush and breaking branches that suggested a bull moose rather than a bird. And then I caught a glimpse, something that broke from the shadows, went across the road, that we were camped at the end of the road at a bermed terminus of the road, and it broke from the shadows across the road to the forest line on the other side. I wouldn't have seen it had I not had night vision to detect it in the darkness, and it was marginal. And I don't mean to overly equivocate, but I would prefer to have a much better visual encounter at one of those eye-to-eye contacts with it. But yeah, I think I did catch a glimpse of something. We found sign, we found tracks that it apparently had left as it receded or retreated from our campsite, yeah. I found footprints in the field, sometimes in remote places on at least half a dozen occasions. Heard multiple vocalizations, had things come into camp and rifle through backpacks and whatnot. Had one walk right alongside my tent under the cover of the fog and see the fingers pressed through the rainfly. So I'm convinced. It's not a matter of belief. I'm convinced by the evidence and the experiences that I've had.
First of all, what would the proper terminology for these, like Sasquatch, Yeti?
Right. Well, in the States, the term that caught on in the public mind was Bigfoot. Basically, just a description of these large footprints. In Canada, Sasquatch has been more popular, a term that was coined by J.W. Burns, who was a teacher and a writer on with the Chehalis Indians, First Nations. And there are numerous other terms through history, back east in the south, booger, mountain devil, other various terms that kind of convey the monstrosity of it, meaning in the old term, the marvel, the singularity, the unusual, anomalous nature of the creature. Then there are other terms worldwide. You mentioned Yeti. Yeti is a native term that describes a species in the Himalayas that I don't think is equivalent to Sasquatch. Another one of these relics.
Exactly. Well, like you said, right? Like they're obviously different because of their foot size. So, but if you were to make a catch-all term for just these global, larger, hairy.
Well, the term that I apply is a term which I resurrected. That was first coined by a Russian cultural anthropologist who was fascinated by the notion of wild men, and he called them relict hominoids. So relict with a T is the term that is preferred in biological usage that describes a population or a species that was once more extensive, more widespread, that is now very restricted in distribution and numbers. Hominoid means human-shaped, or hominoid is also the shorthand for a member of the superfamily Hominoidea. Waxing a little technical here, but the point being that that in a more precise taxonomic or classification sense, it's a member of the family of primates that includes us and the apes, the tailless monkeys. So it certainly would nest within that. Whether it's more human-like or more ape-like, that remains to be determined.
What do you think the future of relict hominoid research will be, both in academia and enthusiasts?
Well, it's always a little dodgy, as I have the prospect of retirement looming on the horizon. You're always looking for who are the contenders in the field, the pretenders, to replace me in my more open engagement with this topic. I do interact. I mean, it's not like I'm a singular personality. I interact with lots of academics and professionals, often behind the scenes. Few of them are as open about their interests. But I think this is gaining traction, that young academics are curious, they're interested, they're not indoctrinated by the dogma that there can be only one hominin species on the planet at a time. They recognize the growing hominin fossil record and its diversity, the growing ape fossil record. We now recognize more than 60 species of extinct ape that once lived on this planet. So even our apes of today, the gorillas, the chimps, the orangs, are themselves relict hominoids, in that they were once much more widespread and greater in numbers, and are tremendously reduced and if not endangered, like the mountain gorilla. So I think that it will more and more be recognized that this is a very legitimate question of anthropology, and it's just a matter of time, I think, until some physical remains are discovered, or as is more likely the case, DNA analysis will eventually reveal a novel sequence or a novel chromosomal rearrangement that attests to the existence of an as yet unrecognized primate species.
Do you think we'll see any breakthroughs or solid, like this? There's something actually going on here within the Sentry.
Oh, definitely. I think there are two significant lines of research that are just on the cusp of kind of taking us to the next level. beyond the boot leather, the trail cameras, the thermal imagers, and so forth. And one of those is environmental DNA that allows us to collect DNA samples with the net cast much more broadly in a given geographical area. As we look at the traces of DNA that are left by all of the occupants of a region. The other is the advances in aerial survey techniques using drones and using not only more penetrating thermal imaging. I don't think that there's going to be military-grade thermal imagers which can penetrate the canopy made available to the public in my lifetime. I think that's a ways off. But improvements are being made in LiDAR, for example, that are capable, that is a method that is capable of penetrating the canopy. And the resolution is improving to the point that it won't be too long before we can fly over, take images, and pick out individual bear or deer or elk or a squirrel on a tree branch, and so maybe also a Sasquatch. So a more extensive aerial survey may provide the means by which to identify an unknown species.
I mean, there's no way to know, but if you had to do a time frame guess, when do you think we'd be seeing this? How many years from?
Well, the technicians at companies that use LiDAR have told me that within just a matter of years we'll be able to resolve individual animals under the forest canopy with LiDAR flyover. So I'm hoping that will be soon.
So are we talking 5 years? You think we'll see more confirmation of a Squatch?
Well, that's potential, yeah. If once the technology is available, then you have to have the investigators and the skilled professionals to apply that, and the financing necessary to support those people in the field over extended periods of time. Again, we're looking for the moving needle in a haystack. Mm-hmm. So it'll still remain a challenge. I mean, even if science were to acknowledge tomorrow that, okay, you're right, based on this evidence, we acknowledge that Sasquatch exists, it's not suddenly then going to become easy to study these animals in the field, because they exhibit the characteristics of those species that have been notoriously difficult to study. That is, that they're solitary, they're far-ranging, they're generalized in their diet. They're very rare and diverse or dispersed throughout their environment. So it's a challenge to be able to find them, let alone make systematic observations of them.
Is there anything that you would like to say to colleagues, if you will, that are very adamant that no, this cannot be a thing?
Well, I think we're now to the point where you cannot say it's impossible. They don't exist. That's just not a defensible position anymore. There's no reason that there couldn't be such things existing. And now we have a scientific context that accommodates the prospect of the existence of other relict hominoid species. So then it boils down to the probability, the question of what are the odds, what are the chances that such a thing exists right under our nose, basically, and we've not acknowledged it. And there are reasons why that has been the case, but I think there are no good reasons for scientists, for the scientific community to simply ignore this, to sit on their hands, so to speak, until a physical specimen. There's a well-known ideological skeptic who's notorious for saying, "Show me the body. The science starts once you have a body." That's the most unscientific, inane statement anyone can make. The science starts when you ask a question and how you proceed to address that question. And so that's what we're doing. We're at that stage of discovery where we are categorizing and cataloging the evidence that is really suggestive. And oftentimes skeptics have this favorite piece of missing evidence that they harp on. well, why don't you have this? Why haven't you? How can you not have this? Well, my response is, well, the fact that that we don't have that is why we're still looking. But how can you ignore all of this? For me, it's the footprint evidence. That's my expertise, and maybe that gives me a better appreciation of the impact and the weight of that evidence. But I would respond, how can then you explain this remarkably consistent footprint record we have that attests to a creature that is remarkably adapted as a large-bodied aid to walk on two legs and navigate the terrain of this rugged mountainous forest in which they reportedly live. So I just say, not only to have an open mind, but be curious, have a spirit of exploration. For me, that's what science is all about. It's not. It's to ask the questions that are at the edge of our understanding, and being too skeptical, being too conservative, can thwart, can prevent our discovery of novel phenomena.
Running at the end here, is there anything that you would like to add?
No, I think that I can always put a plug for my book. I didn't bring any books to sell here across the border, but if people are really interested, I have written a book entitled Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, and it can be obtained through Amazon, for example, but it's a good starting point for someone who's curious and interested. It's also profusely illustrated. I'm a very visual learner and teacher, and it's the anatomy, the anatomist in me, I guess, comes out. It's a very descriptive book of the evidence, and with lots of visual depictions. Good place to start.
Tell me a bit about your book. Is there anything that we didn't cover in this conversation that's in there that's noteworthy?
Well, the book, as it suggests, Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, it is not just my perspective, but the book was actually born of a documentary that was the same title, in which the producer sort of broke the mold, which to that point had been, you'd have someone that proposes, a provocative piece of evidence or presents, only to have someone, an armchair skeptic, snipe it, take shots at it. And it was kind of a tired formula. So he said, let's let the evidence speak for itself, and we'll bring in those experts, disinterested or otherwise, to comment on that evidence. And so it has the voices of quite a litany of experts in fingerprints, in hair analysis, in vocalization, in all sorts of, myself talking about the footprint evidence and so on. So the book is largely my own personal odyssey with that evidence, but it is echoed all along the way by the insights of these various both academic and otherwise professional experts weighing the evidence. And when you've gone through it, it's like, how do you account for all of this? It provides a very compelling case that there's something that's leaving footprints, that's shedding hair, that's voiding scat, that's vocalizing, that's being witnessed by sober, often very experienced outdoorsmen or professionals. It's hard, and that is firmly rooted within the indigenous traditions of the region. Hard to just brush it aside as, it's just a bunch of stories. There's a lot more to it than just stories.
And my final question for you, I like to end all of my interviews with this question. What's a fun fact about yourself? Doesn't have to be related to Squatch or anthropology. It can be if you want.
Yeah,
just any fun fact about yourself.
Let's see. Fun fact. I'm terrible at these kinds of questions. So here's a fun fact. I was interviewed by Dan Aykroyd when he was about to launch a new documentary series, and I showed up in a black mock t-shirt, turtleneck t-shirt, and they didn't like that, so I ended up wearing one of Dan Aykroyd's dress shirts while he interviewed me. It turns out he, being Canadian, had done some of his work in the Northwest Territories, I guess, on a surveying crew, and had heard many stories, and some of the First Nations people he encountered said, "You be careful out there in the bush, or the hairy man is going to get you." And so he's always been fascinated by the prospect of Sasquatch, and so I really got the red carpet treatment as his guest, being interviewed by him, and had a great time. Unfortunately, his show wasn't picked up by the networks, and I think his interests have gone lots of different directions, and we've never reconnected since that time. But it was in his nice pale blue button-down shirt for the interview. And then it was funny because then he shows up in a black t-shirt and a black leather vest, and I'm going, how come he gets to wear black and I don't get to wear black?
It's always the people that, having done this question probably at least twice a week for the past 6 months, it's always the people that are like, I'm terrible with fun facts, that give the best fun facts.
Oh, was that a good one? Okay.
That was good. I enjoyed that.